The Mike Bickle Independent Investigation Report is in, and guys, it is worse than any of us thought. But the good news is, there's lessons we can learn in the church from this situation to do better, to be better, and to protect people better. So in today's video, that's exactly what we're talking about. Let's dive in together. It's gross, guys. It is gross, some of the stuff that this guy was able to get away with. And this investigation has now concluded that this stuff went back years and it was way bigger than any of us thought. It went way farther than any of us thought. So I want to look through the Julie Roy's article on this. And then where I want to spend the time most is I want us to really look through pieces of the 68-page report, the things I think we can learn from most as we move forward. Because when this stuff first came out, there were a whole lot of people taking up for Mike Bickle and saying, no, this guy's a prophet. He's a man of God. These allegations are false. It was full on Darvo. Make the people who are bringing the allegations look bad. And the only reason why he ended up getting removed was because this thing kept growing and more witnesses came forward. More and more potential victims came forward. And if you remember as well, what makes this even a little crazier, a little more icky right now, is that the person who was kind of leading the charge of making sure they walked through this, got an investigation and all of that, one of their top apostolic elders who led them through this was none other than Dr. Michael Brown, who is now himself under an independent investigation by Firefly, if I'm remembering that correctly. So we're waiting to see what comes out there because he's had allegations brought against him, right? And so you got these people in these charismatic NAR type circles. There's a lot of this stuff going on. I was hoping that some of these allegations weren't as bad as we thought. It's went the other way. They were actually worse. So let's go ahead. Let's take a look quickly at some of the things that we can learn from the article that the Roy's report put out. And then we're going to look directly at pieces of this investigative report that Firefly did. So give me just a second. I'll pull this up, share my screen with you guys. Again, the headline breaking: IHOP founder Mike Bickle essayed 17 women, according to the investigation. 17 is a lot more than we previously had heard about or thought about. Mike Bickle, founder of the International House of Prayer in Kansas City, groomed and essayed 17 women, some of whom were minors, too many who were minors, according to this investigation. And again, that was released yesterday. In some cases, the abuse constituted rape. Like, it's bad, guys. This is really, really bad. And I'm just going to not even say it going forward. Like, this is, you're going to see it a couple of times in the reports and you read it. I'm not saying it, and we're going to talk about it as little as possible, but there are some really bad allegations in here. We're not going to get into any details about those because I don't want to trigger anybody. That is available if you want to read it. But the magnitude of these allegations, guys, this isn't small stuff. This is really big stuff. Throughout the investigation, we've identified and interviewed 17 survivors who were either essayed or experienced essay misconduct, including all kinds of things, including spiritual abuse. So spiritual abuse was probably some of the smallest stuff that they talk about, okay? Most of this was perpetrated by Bickle, but you're going to actually see there were other staff members that this investigation found were involved. This is systemic, guys. This goes beyond Mike Bickle. This is not just one bad leader. This is systemic, according to this investigation. And they said that this was running, according to their findings, from the 1970s on. This stuff went on for over 50 years. Over 50 years, and was covered up. Then they still denied it. If we didn't have an independent investigation and we didn't know this now, a lot of these survivors would still be living with all of this, and Mike Bickle would still be doing this. That is, God, guys, it's sickening. It's wild. It's why as churches, we've got to get to the point where we're not scared to commit to, hey, when allegations are brought of any kind of abuse, we're going to put a pastor on paid leave. We're not going to assume they're guilty. We're going to put them on paid leave. We're going to get an independent investigation done, and we're going to fight for the truth. And then once we find out the truth, we will work them to make the right steps, okay? We can't be scared of these independent investigations because so many times they're showing us things that have been hidden for 50 years. This stuff was going on, okay?
Anyway, it says these acts of abuse have a profound and lasting impact on the lives of victims, causing significant spiritual, psychological harm. Bickle and his executive leadership team also responded to the reports. This is talking about the response of SA with deliberate indifference. Deliberate indifference and discouraged victims from involving law enforcement because, of course, that would ruin everything, right? So all of that is in that report. And again, this shouldn't be surprising. The Roy's report reached out to Mike Bickle for comment, didn't get a response. The Roy's report reached out to IHOP's press office, didn't receive a response. Now, this is what I love about Firefly's report. They had committed from the beginning, the organization that paid for this, that they were going to release this in full to the public, unedited, unredacted, and that is exactly what they did. And like I said, be careful if you've been through any of this, if you are a victim of any kind of SA, because this can be very triggering. They didn't redact anything. They didn't edit anything. It's fully out there if you read that report. It also says, even though the advocate group that brought these allegations initially, and we're trying to make sure that this stuff happened, even though they're behind this third-party investigation, IHOPKC has chosen not to endorse the investigation. Surprise, surprise, IHOPKC has shrunk in size. Forerunner Church closed down because this isn't a good look, okay? But they're still running their prayer room. They're still running parts of this ministry, okay? Not only did we get this full report, but Tikkun Global, who, again, paid for this through Firefly, they have put together an 8-person pastor recommendation team. They're going to review the report, and they're going to make third-party independent pastoral recommendations for how to go forward with this in a way that protects people, that brings healing to not only the victims, but also to the church. And I love that they've committed when those are available, they're going to make those recommendations public as well. I think all churches, this is a lesson we can learn from this. All churches, we need to embrace independent investigations quickly when these allegations come up, because everybody wins when we just pursue truth. But beyond that, we need to commit to making the results of those investigations and the recommendations we get public so that there's nothing to hide. Okay. So that's it as far as from the article. I want to look at some of these things, though, to give you an idea of why it's so important. When we talk about the Safe Church Pledge, we're talking about 16 safe church commitments that churches can make. And guys, here's what I know. I know they're a little uncomfortable. There are things like, hey, we're going to share what our top earners make. We're going to share financial information. They're having whistleblower policies. They're committing to doing independent investigations and having leave policies and protection policies, not just for children, but also for teens and adults. All of that stuff, I understand it's work and I understand it's uncomfortable, but I want you to pair those things we're asking churches to do. Those steps we're asking churches to do are so minorly uncomfortable compared to the results that we're seeing and the heartache that we're seeing, the grief we should be feeling from what just came out in this. And when churches have practices like the Safe Church Pledge in place, stuff like this can't go on for 50 years. If it does happen, it's hard to hide and even harder to get away with. Churches, pastors, church leaders, elders, even though some of these steps are uncomfortable and it's easier to do business as the status quo, we can't afford to keep the status quo going, because this harm, the heinous harm from this sin, can't be undone, okay? And this stuff erodes trust in the church. But beyond that, those victims are never going to be the same. We owe it to people in our churches to do the work up front to make sure that we're protecting people. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to pull up pieces of this report. I got them together in advance so that I didn't accidentally share anything that, again, is too graphic or could be too triggering. But if any of this feels triggering, feel free to jump off of the live stream, to jump off of the video. We want to make sure that you're protected. You can find, I'll link this as well, you can find this full 68-page report in its entirety. You can read all of it. It's all public, unredacted. We're not trying to hide anything, okay? But you see that, it's the Firefly, the executive summary for the independent SA investigation. Throughout the investigation, Firefly meticulously reviewed and analyzed over 6,000 documents directly related to this case. So you're going to get an idea in these first few pages. You're going to get an idea of the scope of this investigation. These are people who specialize in this. And guys, they go all out. 6,000 documents, over 6,000 documents were analyzed. Okay. Not only that, they did interviews with 210 individuals, and the report sought to uncover the underlying dynamics. So, not just what happened, what were the underlying dynamics that allowed the SA to persist, that allowed the spiritual abuse to persist, and how did it go unaddressed? We didn't know until the report. How did it go unaddressed and unnoticed for 50 years? So, I so appreciate that. 210 people interviewed, and over 6,000 documents were went through. Through this investigation, Firefly conducted 210 initial witness interviews, but they also conducted 28 re-interviews. So when things came up and they said, hey, we need more information, they went back, even if it took travel, to do those 28 re-interviews. So I hope you see this investigation was really well done. Like, it was really meticulously done, and they've got the 68-page report to go with it. They do outline their full investigative process, so you can go back and look at that as well. As we go forward, one of the things I marked out, it says, despite multiple attempts to contact the current board of directors for comments on the proactive measures implemented in IHOPKC, we've received no responses. So Firefly reached out to find out from the board, hey, we're sure you've done stuff since all this broke. What are some of the proactive steps you've taken to make sure that IHOP is a safer place now? They were going to include that in the report, but nobody responded. And here's one of the things, for those of you that don't know, we did a research project that is about to go live. We did a research project to inform the Safe Church Pledge. We looked at 100 churches that have faced recent scandal. And out of those 100 churches that have faced recent scandal, guys, I'm telling you, this is wild. The majority of them got less transparent and less accountable after the allegations and after the scandal than before. Instead of putting proactive things in place to make sure that they were more accountable and transparent, they just said, we're going to hide stuff more because we got hurt when things came out. And it looks like that's what IHOPKC is doing. So the lack of response from the board members further exacerbates the issue, raising concerns about the efficacy and the sincerity of the proactive measures that were reportedly put in place. Through the victims and witnesses interviewed, we have found there was a culture of systemic abuse and cover-ups that thrived at IHOPKC. And this is one of, I think, the biggest things from this report. This wasn't an isolated incident. This wasn't just one leader. There was a culture of systemic abuse and a culture of systems that allowed abusive behaviors to go unaddressed and in some ways, I think, rewarded them. Okay, we have made several attempts to contact Bickle and have been unable to elicit any responses from him. So this wasn't just Julie Roy's. This is for months. Firefly has been trying to talk to Mike Bickle. They didn't just do this investigation without him. He was going to be one of the interviews, and he's refused to talk to investigators. Throughout this investigation, we've identified and interviewed 17 survivors. And again, that's the highest number we've known of so far, way higher than anybody had reported in the past, who were either SA'd or experienced SA misconduct, including all of the different types of SA that they're going to list there. And again, it started in as early as the 1970s. They've got a whole section where they talk about manipulative and sophisticated grooming tactics. Okay, that this was from their perspective and all the interviews they've done, it looks like this was intentional. This was calculated, that Mike Bickle knew exactly what he was doing as he laid the groundwork for months and years in advance in some of these situations. Again, we're not going to get into any details on those. Now, in this part of the report, you're going to see some things like IW, which is one of the interviewed witnesses, IS, which is one of the interviewed survivors. You're going to see one that is like ASW, which is a staff witness or a staff, someone who is accused on staff. So when you see things like that, you see like the IW, that's what those mean, okay? So we're just going to look at some of the things that they found there. From those we spoke with, Bickle was seen as a fatherly figure. Remember when we talked about this with Chris Hodges and that whole idea of being a spiritual father. Bickle was seen as a fatherly figure and took on the role of a protector. So you're going to see many of these people talked about Mike Bickle being a spiritual father or saying he was a spiritual father to them. It was one of the things that allowed this environment to eventually get to SA. Okay. Many repeated patterns were observed among the victims. So as you looked at different victims, different witnesses, there were a lot of repeated patterns, including stuff like this spiritual fathering and the manipulation. These patterns included systemic grooming, emotional manipulation, and spiritual abuse. The victims were often isolated from their support networks, making them more vulnerable to Bickle's control. Also, isolation is a form of spiritual abuse by itself. This consistent and deliberate approach further highlights the calculated nature of Bickle's actions and the widespread impact on victims' lives. So again, guys, this was a pattern. It was intentional. Went on for 50 years. This was not just a one-time situation. Bickle told women he was their spiritual father. There, that comes up again. And he told them not to tell anyone what was happening. This manipulation tactic further isolated his victims, more spiritual abuse, making them feel dependent on him for spiritual guidance and support. That's more spiritual abuse, overemphasis on the leader and the implication that the leader has a divine position. That's 3 different types of spiritual abuse that we see right there in that one sentence. Bickle's behavior escalated into SA, and I'm just going to let you read it. I'm not even going to say any of that. And here's the reason why I put that in there. I almost didn't put that in there. This escalated into really serious against the law kind of stuff in their state. They gave the statute and everything. This was big time, deep stuff that is against the law. And if it had been reported to police, there's a great chance, based on how this investigation came out, that Mike Bickle would have actually ended up in prison. But as their spiritual father, these witnesses said he told them not to tell the police and that those things would just hurt the church. Bickle reportedly shared prophetic words with a couple of these people, a couple of the victims, claiming that the Lord had shown him that Mike Bickle's wife was going to die and that they would be in the chariot with him. They would basically take her spot, that God was going to allow Mike Bickle's wife to die, and then they would become his romantic interest, right? He was giving them prophecies about this and misusing that kind of charismatic prophetic role. During an interview with another, she advised in October of 1983, Mike explicitly told me of a prophecy regarding the death of his wife, Diane. He believed Diane's death would happen in an earthquake, and because of that prophecy, that would push the path forward for him and I to pursue a romantic relationship together. It's wild. That's spiritually abusive. That is wrong in every way. And he's doing that by speaking as a prophecy and speaking for God, which I think makes it way worse. That was repeated to multiple people. Bickle's actions. Let's think about this. He had one of the survivors pray Psalm 51. He would have them pray Psalm 51 after they had any sort of sexual encounter. And that was another way that he manipulated them. He would have them pray Psalm 51 and pray for repentance, making them feel like it was their fault that they were having this inappropriate relationship, which was really just adult clergy SA. So again, guys, this just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. This is why we have to be quicker to investigations. We have to be quicker to putting pastors on leave. We have to be quicker to instituting safe church practices, even if they're doing them completely outside of us. That's not what it's about. We got to do something to make this stuff harder. When you look at all of the allegations that are swirling around Chris Hodges, when you look at the allegations that are playing out in court around TD Jakes, and now you look at this stuff, these aren't just allegations. These are findings from an investigation. We've got to do all we can to be above reproach to protect people and keep these things from happening. This should never happen in a church of any kind. It shouldn't happen anywhere. The church should be the last place in the world that this stuff happens, okay? Other staff, and this was, again, one of the really big findings, it wasn't just Mike Bickle. Other staff at IHOPKC were involved in the SA and the cover-ups. The investigation into IHOPKC has indeed uncovered troubling patterns. Beyond the allegations against Bickle, we uncovered numerous instances of SA and misconduct perpetrated by individuals associated with IHOPKC. Throughout the investigation, we identified 16 accused staff members that weren't Mike Bickle. So they identified 16 accused staff members implicated in SA claims, and many of the interviewed survivors shared their stories corroborating this, okay? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm not going to share a lot of these, but I'm going to share some of these. A lot of these I can't share because the stuff is, again, so graphic. So you can go look at it on your own. We're not going to share anything like that. We're just sharing for educational purposes. So we're not sharing a ton of that, but I will share a few of these with you because I think there's lessons we can learn. One of the accused staff members allegedly SA'd a 14-year-old in the 1980s. Again, this isn't just Mike Bickle. This was another staff member doing this in the 80s, and it was covered up. Despite the controversy, the board ultimately decided, this was reported, the board ultimately decided that same staff member should be back on staff at IHOP, and the decision was made while knowing all the facts against them. Okay, there was actually a grace report and an investigation that was done, but they didn't make it public. They didn't take it to the authorities. And Grace had said, should this person ever be permitted to return to IHOP, they must never be allowed on the property where minors are. Yet, that's exactly what happened. Nothing was ever done to protect other minors. Another accused staff member in 2010, so this is 30 years later, allegedly SA'd a 16-year-old male. And there's more to that. Again, I'm going to let you read. I'm not going to say all the things. There's a lot more to that. Another one of the survivors advised that they were SA'd by yet another staff member. You see this. There was 1, 2. This is number 6. We skipped a lot. And then we're told not to discuss it with anyone. It's a clear failure of the organization's duty to protect and support its members. By the way, pastors are mandated reporters. When we're in church, we're mandated reporters. In my state, I don't know about Missouri, but in my state, we're all mandated reporters when we find out about any sort of abuse of a minor. So a lot of this stuff, it was completely illegal to not protect these children, okay? And again, instead of protecting them, they forced this survivor into basically a counseling program within the church instead of reporting it to anybody else. This is accused staff member number 9. Survivor number 14 was SA'd by the staff member as a part of another one of the programs, okay? And then they tried to tell them that what actually happened to them wasn't what happened to them. They tried to gaslight them that it wasn't actually the illegal act that it was. They also found this investigation beyond all of those 16 accused staff members. They found concerns with the highest level of leadership, not just Mike Bickle, but the entire executive leadership team, basically the board that is running IHOPKC. The investigation has revealed that certain members of the ELT at IHOPKC were more focused on suppressing and minimizing reports of SA rather than supporting the victims or staff that reported them. And guys, we see this time after time in church scandal after church scandal. It's happening way too often. We have got to stop protecting the reputation of our churches and our leaders over protecting people, parishioners, people that Jesus gave his life for on the cross. We can't protect our reputation over them, okay? The church's reputation should be known. Again, what Jesus said, we're going to be known by how we love one another. Our reputation is determined by how we protect each other, not by if we can cover things up and hide them under the rug. The church, Jesus, God, they do not need our protection. What they care about is the protection of people. And I get fired up about this because this stuff has to stop. It has to stop. But if we don't do something different, this stuff is going to keep happening. There are always going to be bad apple leaders who get in, who are charismatic, who are manipulative. We've got to take every step we can as churches to say, not on our watch, this will not happen. And that is why we fight so hard asking churches to take the Safe Church Pledge. It's why we want to see 1,000 churches take this pledge, and we're going to work on training them all year long because, guys, everybody gets hurt when these things happen. Everybody gets hurt when these things come out. And this is not Jesus. This is not Jesus at all. We have to be better. face-to-face with the abusers. The investigation revealed that many victims were subjected to Matthew 18. Now, if you haven't listened to the podcast episode that we just published yesterday with Dave Rubelin, we talk about how Matthew 18, it should not be used in any sort of spiritual abuse or beyond situation. Okay. Matthew 18 is made for peers. It is not made in situations where there's a power dynamic. And this report found that they were subjected to Matthew 18, and a lot of these victims were pressured to go face to face in confrontations with the people who had hurt them. Okay. And then they were gaslit and told they were lying, told they were hurting the church, told they were going to, cause people to go to hell, and all the things that we normally hear, I'm sure. Interns entering a specific program were compelled to disclose sins and experiences often involving childhood victimization. If you go back to one of the episodes we did mid-January, where we said, what is spiritual abuse and what are the signs? One of them is forced disclosure of sin, forced confession, right there. That's more spiritual abuse. Why do we talk about spiritual abuse so much? Because if we'll deal with it when it's spiritual abuse, we can keep it from turning into SA and more. Okay? Because that's usually where it's going to start. The forced confessions were common. This comes from one of the witnesses. Forced confessions were common as we were often coerced with music and prayer in pure heart weekends where we were to confess to strangers all of our sins. And then it says again, the use of Matthew 18 meetings not only silenced victims, but perpetuated a culture of fear and intimidation, because those Matthew 18 meetings were used. They were used all over. We've got just a couple more things and then we'll wind down. Another one of the witnesses said that the phrase, "You don't speak against the Lord's anointed, touch not the Lord's anointed," was often used to silence those who tried to report abuse. Now, let's just talk about this for a moment. That passage is essentially talking about a king. Our pastors are not kings. It's the first thing we got to get through our head. Pastors, you're not kings, okay? No matter how much you love your pastor, they're not a king. Second of all, David and Saul were both anointed by God to be kings. Your pastor is not anointed to do anything. We all have a general anointing to walk in our giftings, but your pastor doesn't have a more special anointing than you do. And I want you to think about the kings who were anointed by God to be kings. David was anointed by God to be king. And then guess what? Nathan was not scared to go toe-to-toe with him when he sinned against Uriah and Bathsheba. Nathan went toe-to-toe with him at, honestly, the fear that he could have had everything taken from him. Okay? He could have been killed. He went toe-to-toe with David anyway and said, "Hey, anointed one, king, what you're doing is wrong." Okay? He went toe-to-toe with him. That's what we got to learn as Christians. This whole idea of touch not the Lord's anointed is not biblical. It's a twist and a manipulation that forgets that God has also called us to bring correction no matter how big and how powerful someone is when they are hurting people and they're misusing their authority and their anointing. And then one of the last things that it says, this is the last thing we'll talk about. Firefly handles SA. They don't handle general spiritual abuse. They don't handle financial stuff. But one of the things that came up a lot, it says, we've received numerous inquiries regarding whether Firefly will investigate the alleged financial improprieties of IHOPKC. Again, one of the things we talk about a lot in the Safe Church Pledge is financial stuff, and people get upset because they say, Jeff, it's not that big of a deal if we're transparent with our finances, okay? That's between us. That's to be kept private, like all of those sort of things. And churches give all of these excuses why it's okay to be less transparent than the world. When the reality is, almost every time that we find SA and we find deep criminal allegations, we also find financial issues, okay? Mike Bickle, IHOPKC, financial issues. Go back to Robert Morris and Gateway, financial issues. We're going to continue to find them because they are connected. Again, if we will stop spiritual abuse and financial abuse and all of that misconduct early, it will stop it before it leads to deep SA, before it leads to criminal misconduct and all of those things. We got to be above reproach in the little things if we ever hope to be above reproach in the big thing. So again, that just came out. There's going to be a lot more that comes out from it. I'll link the report if you want to read it. You can go and you can do that. It's also linked in the Roy's Report article. But guys, here's what we found out. There's a lot of people who were taken up for Mike Bickle, including Dr. Michael Brown, who's now under his own investigation. We'll see how that turns out. Mike Bickle, there's a lot going on, which we're going to talk about soon. Sean Bowles and all of the false prophecy allegations with him. We got pictures of him with Mike Bickle. You got all these people. You got these leaders who are running around in circles together where there's one scandal after another, and it's almost like they knew and they were covering it up. That's why the scandals surrounding Chris Hodges were such a big deal. And I'll just show you a couple of things here. Let's think about this. And again, we don't know that Chris Hodges knew of any of these things, okay? But let's just look at some of the scandals around him. You had Jeremy Foster from Hope City Church, right? You had Jeremy Foster from Hope City Church. And let me pull up some others. That is just one screen right there. Got a few more to show you. This is why people have those questions, though. You got John Gray, who's had a lot of things swirling around him. He was very close to Chris Hodges at a lot of those, archetype events. You had Mekon Carter, who after being removed because of misconduct, after being removed for sin, for sexual sin, that Chris Hodges, Church of the Highlands, hired him, and they didn't fire him until reports came out that he had went not only SA, but beyond SA with his former assistant. And then he's actually preached in other places. You see right there, after a year's silence, the pastor who was accused was filling an ARC pulpit again. You have Tabner Smith, who was one of the poster boys that Chris Hodges and ARC leaders talked about. They wanted every single ARC planting pastor to talk to Tabner Smith. He lost his church basically to infidelity and everything else, but now they just renamed, and he's still a pastor. No one, including ARC, really spoke against it. You had Josh Gagnon, who was leading a huge ARC church. His entire executive team and him resigned or were removed because of bullying and financial misconduct, and that church closed down. You have the celebrity preacher scam that Chris Hodges was a part of, as far as like he was getting paid as a part of it, and that tied him to people like Brian Houston and others. You had Robert Morris, who was an overseer at Church of the Highlands, and they removed him once his SA allegations came out. So again, when we're looking at all of this with like Mike Bickle and Dr. Michael Brown and Sean Bowles and all of them, then when we look at this other stuff, when you keep seeing a leader who is constantly around all of these other people with scandal and they don't seem to know about it, one of two things is probably true. Either they know about it and they're covering it up, or they really lack discernment and they're struggling to discern who the people around them really are. Both of those should be very, very concerning to us. Okay. So again, when there's smoke like this, we got to act like there may be fire. Okay. We got to get better when allegations are brought. Let's not assume pastors are guilty. Let's put them on paid leave and let's immediately commission an independent investigation. We're not investigators. We're not private detectives in our churches. So we need to hire people who can do this. We need to submit to and commit to not only acting on the recommendations, but making the results of those reports public. It's going to protect everybody involved. And more than that, we can't wait until these things happen. We've got to start making proactive decisions of how we can make our churches the safest places on the planet, because there should be no safer place on the planet than your local church. So again, guys, man, this is heavy. I said there's a lot going on in the church world and there's a lot going on, but there's lessons that we can learn from Chris Hodges so abruptly to what's going on with TD Jakes and the new allegations that surfaced, to the report and the findings of the investigation against Mike Bickle. Guys, these are heinous things that we all wish hadn't have happened, but they can matter. We can make them matter for something if we learn from them and we use them to build healthier, safer church environments. So I just want to ask you maybe if you're a church leader, what can you do to protect against these things in your church? If you're just a parishioner, what can you do? What kind of conversations can you have to protect against this stuff in your church? Would you be willing to ask your church leaders to look at the Safe Church Pledge and to sign it? And if they say we can't sign it, ask them why. We'll jump on a call with both of you and talk about their concerns and try to help them. But we've all got a role to play. We can't keep watching this and hiding our heads in the sand and acting like it won't happen at our church. Because the truth is, if we don't do something different, this can happen with any leader. It can happen with any church. We got to be committed to safety in a brand new way. So anyway, I hope that there's been something that you've learned, something that's encouraged you even in this heaviness. Let's all take a step. Let's all do something where we can to get better in our churches, to protect people. And hopefully the next time that we do a live stream, next thing that we talk about is going to be something that's much easier. Next week for the podcast, we're going to be dropping an episode, hopefully on Monday, where I'm going to give a proactive challenge to a pastor who I think is a good person, who I think loves Jesus and is far away from all of this. But I'm going to give a challenge and a rebuke to a very well-known megachurch pastor to say, hey, I don't think what you're doing is a huge problem or a disqualifying problem yet. But if you don't fix it, if you don't repent of it, if you're not willing to be held accountable, it could very easily get to these places, right? Anyway, hopefully the majority of what we get to talk about is much better, and if nothing else, proactive as we learn together. But let's all do our part to make safe churches. That's it for this one today. I'll see you guys soon for another episode, another video, or just another part of the podcast with the Church Disrupted podcast. Let us know what you think about this stuff. Let us know what lessons you learn in the comments below. But until next time, grace and peace. We'll see you guys soon.